I never should have taken the job. It sounded easy enough, hunting a creature that had been preying on livestock in the remote forests of Montana. The locals called it the Hollow Stalker, an old legend about a thing that came in the night, leaving nothing but blood and bones. I didn't believe in folklore, but I believed in money. And the pay was good. I arrived in a small, dying town called Ash Hollow. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, and the people didn't talk much. The few who did just muttered warnings: stay inside after dark, don't look into the trees, and whatever happens, never answer a voice that calls your name from the woods. I ignored them. That night, I set up in a hunting blind near the tree line. My rifle was loaded, my knife strapped to my belt. The first few hours were quiet. Too quiet. Not even the insects were making noise. Around midnight, I heard it, a rustling in the trees, soft footsteps that didn't belong to a deer or a coyote. Then a whisper. It was my own voice. Ethan. My blood ran cold. The voice was coming from the darkness between the trees, mimicking my own tone, my own breath. I gripped my rifle, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the wind. Then I saw them. Eyes. Not animal eyes, not human. They were hollow, like deep pits of black glass, reflecting the moonlight. They blinked, 1, 2, 3 pairs. Whatever was out there wasn't alone. Then the trees moved. No, not the trees, the shadows. They stretched unnaturally, slipping toward me like ink spreading across paper. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices, all speaking in a tone that mimicked mine, then shifting into the voices of people I knew. My father, my sister, even my own voice as a child. I turned to run, but the air thickened. My body felt sluggish, like I was moving through water. The whispering turned into a low, guttural sound, laughing. They were toying with me. Something brushed against my arm. Long fingers, cold as death. I fired my rifle blindly. The blast echoed through the night, but the laughter didn't stop. Then I felt it, a breath against my neck. I spun around, knife in hand, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. Just silence. I ran. I don't remember getting back to my truck. The next thing I knew, I was speeding down the dirt road, the town of Ash Hollow disappearing in my rearview mirror. The whispers lingered in my ears, even after I crossed state lines. I never went back, but sometimes in the dead of night, I wake up to a voice calling my name. And it sounds just like me. I didn't sleep for days after leaving Ash Hollow. The whispers followed me, clinging to my thoughts like a sickness. I heard them in the wind, in the hum of the highway, even in the static of my motel room's television. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the hollow eyes, the stretching shadows, the unnatural way they moved. But it wasn't just in my head. On my third night away, parked at a lonely roadside motel in Idaho, I heard it again. Ethan! A whisper from outside the window. I froze. I was on the second floor. Slowly, I turned my head toward the curtains. A shadow moved against the dim orange glow of the parking lot lights. The whisper came again, just beneath my breath, like something inside my skull trying to get out. I reached for my rifle. A slow creak filled the room. The closet door. I hadn't opened it. My pulse hammered as I stood, moving toward the door with agonizing slowness. My fingers trembled on the handle. With one sharp motion, I yanked it open, empty. The whisper came again. This time, behind me. I spun, raising the rifle, nothing. Just my empty motel room. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The walls seemed closer, the shadows stretching longer than they should. Then the lights flickered. For a split second, I saw it, standing in the corner, tall and wrong, with those empty black eyes. Its face my face. A grotesque, hollow mockery, grinning wide, teeth too white, too sharp. I fired. The lamp shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The laughter came next. Not from one mouth, but from many, layered over each other, crawling under my skin. The room twisted, stretched, the walls bending at impossible angles. The air was gone. I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned as I staggered back, tripping over my own feet. And then silence. The lights snapped back on. The room was normal. No shattered lamp. No bullet hole in the wall. No shadow in the corner. But something had changed. My reflection in the mirror. It wasn't mimicking me. It was just standing there, staring, even as I turned away. I ran. The descent. For weeks, I kept moving. I drove until I couldn't keep my eyes open, slept in my truck, avoided mirrors, avoided shadows. But it didn't matter. The further I ran, the worse it got. I stopped recognizing my own voice. Sometimes it felt off, a fraction of a second behind my lips, an echo that shouldn't be there. My reflection would blink when I hadn't. Then one night, I woke up outside, not in my motel room, not in my truck, in the woods, somewhere deep, where the trees grew too close together, their branches knotted like grasping fingers. My bare feet sunk into the damp earth. My hands were covered in dirt. My rifle was gone, and they were there, surrounding me, watching. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the sliver of moonlight that cut through the canopy. The whispers started again, layering over each other, filling my skull. I tried to scream, but my throat locked. My body wasn't listening. One of them stepped forward. It looked like me, but its skin was stretched too tight, its grin too wide, its head tilting in unnatural, twitching motions. It opened its mouth, and the whispering voices poured out, each one my own. Then it spoke, not in a whisper, not in a chorus, but in my voice. "You are almost ready." The thing smiled, its teeth black as the void. And then I woke up, back in my truck, miles away, my hands still caked in dirt. But I wasn't alone. My reflection in the rearview mirror was still staring at me, and it was still smiling. Hunting at night had always been a test of patience and skill. The darkness sharpened my senses, making every sound, every movement more intense. But tonight, as I gripped my rifle and stepped into the thick forest, something felt off. The moon barely peeked through the heavy clouds, casting weak beams of silver light through the towering trees. The air was damp, thick with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. Normally, the woods were alive at this hour, owls hooting, insects chirping, but tonight there was nothing. No wind, no rustling branches, just silence. I pressed forward, my boots crunching against the moist earth. The deer I had been tracking couldn't be far. I had spotted its tracks near the river, fresh and deep. I followed them deeper into the woods, my breath steady, my rifle at the ready. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement between the trees. A silhouette, but something about it was wrong. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't anything I recognized. I raised my rifle, peering through the scope. The figure was standing perfectly still between the trees, partially obscured by the darkness. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch impossibly long. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying me. My stomach twisted. I had hunted all my life, but I had never seen anything like this. Then it moved. Not walked. Not ran. Moved. It blurred forward, a shadow slipping through the trees with an unnatural speed. My instincts screamed at me to fire, but before I could react, it vanished. Silence returned. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the rifle. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe the darkness was messing with my perception. But I knew better. A sound broke the silence. A whisper. It came from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. Then another whisper. This time to my left. Then my right. Then ahead. It was circling me. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was prey. I turned to run. The forest felt endless, the trees stretching taller, the ground twisting beneath my feet as if the woods themselves wanted to trap me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse roaring in my ears. I could feel it behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just presence. I risked a glance back, and it was there, right behind me. A grotesque grin stretched across its pale, hollow face, eyes like deep voids, arms outstretched as if reaching for me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I stumbled forward, desperate, pushing my legs beyond their limits. I needed to get out. Then, the trees parted. I burst into a clearing, nearly collapsing onto the wet grass. Moonlight flooded the space, the only safe haven in this cursed forest. I turned, expecting to see it still chasing me. But there was nothing. Just trees. Silent. Still. Watching. I stood there for what felt like hours, my chest heaving, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Had the darkness warped my senses? No. I could still feel it. Watching. Waiting. The hunt wasn't over, and I knew deep down that it never would be. I stood frozen in the clearing, the cold night air wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The silence felt wrong, unnatural, as if the very forest itself was holding its breath. I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. Slowly, I backed away, my hands shaking as I reloaded my rifle. I had no idea if bullets could even stop whatever this thing was, but I needed something, anything, to make me feel less helpless. Then, the whispering returned. It started as a soft murmur, like wind through dead leaves. Then it grew, overlapping voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. They were coming from the trees, from the ground, from the very air around me. I turned sharply, rifle raised. And then I saw them. Not just one. Dozens. Figures shifting in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. Long, twisted bodies. Hollow, grinning faces. Eyes like black pits, absorbing all the light around them. They stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving. Watching. A deep, primal terror rooted me in place. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. Then, as one, they stepped forward. The whispering became a deafening chorus, a cacophony of voices crawling into my skull. My vision blurred. The world tilted. I stumbled backward, trying to keep my footing, but it was useless. The ground itself seemed to shift beneath me, pulling me back toward the forest. They wanted me to come back. I fought against the pull, my hands digging into the damp earth. My rifle was gone. I didn't even remember dropping it. Then I saw it. At the center of them all, the first one. The thing that had started the hunt. It stood taller than the rest, its grotesque grin stretching impossibly wide. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, filled with something worse than hunger. Recognition. It knew me. It had always known me. I gasped as the truth clawed its way into my mind. This wasn't the first time I had been here. I had hunted these woods before, and I had never left. The memories crashed into me like a tidal wave, flashes of past hunts, past nights, past deaths. Over and over again. The same night, the same hunt, the same terror. This was my curse. This was my prison. I was part of the hunt now. The figures surged forward, and as their cold hands gripped me, dragging me back into the darkness, I knew. The hunt would never end. The cold night air bit at my skin as I adjusted my rifle strap and took a deep breath. The moon, half hidden behind thick, shifting clouds, barely illuminated the dense forest ahead. The trees stood tall like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky. I had been hunting these woods for years, but tonight felt different. I had heard the stories, the warnings passed down by the old hunters of the town. They spoke of something unnatural lurking in these woods, a thing that hunted hunters. But I never put much stock in old folklore. I was here for a deer, nothing else. The air was unnaturally still, the usual night sounds, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, were absent. I tightened my grip on the rifle and stepped forward, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The deeper I moved into the woods, the stronger the sensation grew, like something unseen was watching me. Then a noise, a branch snapping somewhere to my left. I turned sharply, raising my rifle, scanning the darkness between the trees. My heart pounded against my ribs as I listened. Silence. Just silence. The kind that makes you feel like you're the only living thing for miles. I forced myself to keep moving. Maybe it was just my nerves getting the best of me. Maybe. Another snap. This time closer. I spun around, finger resting on the trigger, but there was nothing. Just blackness between the trees. My breathing quickened, my pulse thudding in my ears. Something wasn't right. I had hunted long enough to know when an animal was near, and this wasn't an animal. Then a whisper. It was faint, barely audible over my own breathing, but it was there. A hushed voice drifting through the trees, speaking words I couldn't understand. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. The whisper grew louder. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, circling me, slithering through the trees like a living thing. My fingers trembled on the rifle. I turned, desperate to find the source, but the darkness was suffocating. Then I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, gleaming like burning embers in the night. They peered at me from the shadows, unblinking, unnatural. Not the eyes of any creature I had ever hunted. I took a step back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispering had stopped. The forest was dead silent. Then they moved, a blur of black shapes darting between the trees, too fast, too fluid to be human. My body acted before my mind could process. I raised my rifle and fired. The explosion shattered the silence, echoing through the trees. But when the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No blood, no body, just darkness. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the forest, my boots slipping on the damp earth. The whispering returned, louder now, surrounding me, pressing against my skull like 1,000 voices speaking at once. Then, the worst sound of all. Footsteps. Right behind me. I dared a glance over my shoulder. A shadowy figure, impossibly tall, gaunt and twisted, was racing toward me, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled, falling hard onto the forest floor. My rifle flew from my grasp. Pain shot through my hands and knees, but I didn't have time to feel it. The figure was almost on me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The trees blurred past me. The whispering turned into a deafening roar. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. And then, I burst out of the woods. The moment my feet hit the dirt road, everything stopped. The whispers, the footsteps, the presence. I turned back. The forest was still, peaceful, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I never went back to those woods, and I never hunted at night again.